delayed. She delayed this one. So we are back with another episode. Paul, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
I like your shirt. That is the I have the same one.
Yeah, just gotta let people know, I was feeling it today. I was like, today's really hot. I don't really feel like going outside for a walk, but I did it anyway. I posted it on social media or else it wouldn't have happened.
Does Crystal have a website for her shirts and stuff?
Yeah, thehealthymindmovement.com.
Yeah, if you guys are interested in a shirt that Paul has on, they're really comfortable. I like them a lot. She sent us some. Yeah, I like them.
This one's way too big for me. I think I got smaller.
According to social media, it fits nicely around your midsection area.
Really?
Yeah. I got a couple questions about how fat you're getting.
Yeah, super fat. I don't know. I'm still walking around the neighborhood with my shirt off. So there's a fat guy walking around my neighborhood with his shirt off.
Well, that's like the norm in Florida, so it's not that big of a deal.
Oh my God. Some of the stuff I used to see walking through my neighborhood in Florida was like, it was the best. I think I saw more ass cracks on one day than like any time in my whole life.
What part of Tampa did you live in?
I lived in Temple Terrace.
For the most part. Bad part or the good part?
The bad part.
The bad part. Yeah. It's, man, when I first started riding my bike, I would head out because I live in between. I live like in that middle section of like where Temple Terrace gets really bad, right by Busch Gardens.
Yep.
So I would come out and I took a left the first time. No, I took a right the first time out of my apartments and went down into the bad Temple Terrace. And I was like, oof, this is going to be a fast bike ride because if I slow down any bit, I am going to get deboed off my bike very, very fast.
Oh, yeah.
And then literally took a left the next time. And it's like some of the nicest houses you'll ever see at a 5-minute difference in riding.
I remember, so it was my first summer there. I was living like right on 50th, right, like literally across the street from campus. And my mom came to visit. She's like, I want to go for a run. I was like, okay, you get out of campus and go left. Do not go right, go left. She goes right and she's running and she's like, this is not where I was supposed to be. And she said she turned around immediately and sprinted back to the condo. She felt so uncomfortable. This like little like 50-year-old woman just trotting along. It's like,
yeah, it's I've been to a couple places that are Beverly Hills is really bad too, where you'll have Bentleys on top of Bentleys, and then a block over, it's like homeless, ghetto, trash, filth. And I've never seen quite the dichotomy between that. But yeah, Tampa has a little bit of that where you'll be floating around really nice neighborhood and then all of a sudden it just hits you fast. And you're like, oh, things shifted dramatically here.
Yeah, that was the first place I ever saw that sort of thing. Cause like in Canada in general, we don't have like ghettos. There's no, like our bad neighborhoods is like, there's a house that needs to be
painted.
Right. But this, like the past week I was in Vancouver, and because Vancouver is as far west as you can go, the weather is very temperate. You can live outdoors 12 months of the year. There was a block called on a street called West Hastings in downtown Vancouver. I saw people shooting up. I saw people like doing drug deals, like in plain sight. And apparently my buddy was telling me that they spend like $1 million a day on resources for that one intersection, West Hastings and whatever street. And I was like, holy fuck.
It's wild.
It's crazy. I never saw that many homeless people in my life. There's little villages.
Oh yeah. Now that's like a common thing in America, thanks to COVID.
COVID and call it liberal politics.
Something
politics.
Something politics.
I'm not allowed to say anything because now in Canada I will get fined and imprisoned if I say something.
Oh, that's good. That's a good start.
The censorship bill got passed. Now they tabled a new censorship bill, supposedly against hate speech, but it allows the government to fine you up to $70,000 if anything you post on social media is determined to be discriminatory at their own discretion.
Dang, that's wild.
It is.
Man, like I brought this up with Emma a few times, the idea of like having certain restrictions on people's freedoms from
Mhm.
certain things, right? Like the idea that if you can keep yourself healthy and you exercise X amount of minutes and you eat healthy and you have good, like actually good numbers in terms of cholesterol, blood pressure, you should be able to get free healthcare. And if you don't, then you have to pay for your healthcare. And it's the idea of like making it a mandatory thing to be in shape and taking away people's kind of rights to choose whether or not they can eat Oreos without any type of, ramifications for it. And the same thing with like having kids, right? You have so many people that have kids, and it's like, man, there should be some type of psychological test, there should be some type of financial test or something like that, right? To where you have to pass in order for you to. And it's like, no, we have so many freedoms, and it's like, I don't trust us as human beings to be this free. Like, we've clearly shown we're not capable of being able to sustain this
Yeah.
much freedom. We've clearly shown as a species that we are very much not far from chimps in order to make our decisions, and that we should have at least some type of restrictions put in place
It's
to
interesting
help us
because
from ourselves.
so you could look at it as a restriction, or you could look at it as an incentivization, right? Because we incentivize the behaviors that we want repeated. So right now, there's no there's no disincentivization to poor health other than your own misery, I guess.
Right.
But there's also no incentive. In fact, you're almost disincentivized to be in good health because you're paying for something you're not using. At least,
Right.
at least, at least here in Canada, right? So I pay taxes every year that go towards my provincial health coverage, which I'm grateful for, because if I get a life-ending illness or life-altering illness, I get treatment almost right away, and it's world class, whatever, whatever. But for the most part, aside from regular visits to the doctor, um, I actually pay out of pocket for my blood work, because the medical system here will only test my blood for things that might prevent me from getting ill. So like if I go to the doctor and I say, hey, I train really hard and I want to get blood work to make sure that I'm healthy and that everything's in good range and I'm doing right by my body, he'll say, okay, I'll do your normal blood work, which is going to be a CBC.
Yeah, I mean, that's not more that's more or less the same here. You have to have a good conversation and a good doctor to get certain things drawn up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, there's not much of a difference. Like, I'll ask my clients to get their thyroid test. They'll go to their doctor and he'll just test their TSH and T4, and that's it. And it's like, well, there's a lot more to it than that. And they're like, well, that's all he said, that's all I needed. And I'm like, and then I have to have this like back and forth email with like, your doctor is very smart, but he's an idiot when it comes to this.
mm,
So, and then like, well, my doctor said it was fine, so I'm fine. I'm like, okay, well,
if that's what you want to do, like,
let's keep trying to lose weight and run our heads into the wall because we don't have real blood work. So good for you.
yeah. So I mean, I pay out of pocket for that sort of thing, but like, I'm grateful for the fact that if I do fall ill, I can get coverage and don't really have to, like, in the States, if you fell ill and you didn't have insurance, you'd be bankrupt for the rest of your life. Like,
Yeah,
there's a
it'd be
real
tough.
possibility.
Right, for
Um,
sure.
but as a healthy individual, I don't get anything for being healthy aside from my quality of life. There's no, even on insurance forms, because insurance forms use your BMI, like I'm getting penalized, right? So there's really nothing that incentivizes me within the system to be more healthy. So why wouldn't we provide? You wouldn't even need to provide like punishments or restrictions on freedom if you just provided incentives. It
That's
could
what I
be a
said,
big.
right? Like if you pass, you get free healthcare. If you can show that you have a genuine interest in being
Oh, okay.
healthy,
I
you
thought you
get
meant
free
like
healthcare.
I thought you meant that people who weren't healthy would have to pay. Like it would start as free, and then if you're unhealthy, you have to pay.
Well, I mean, we have to pay for their healthcare because they are unhealthy,
It's
right?
true.
But
That's
I
yeah,
brought
yeah,
that up
makes sense.
because we were listening to David Sinclair on the Joe Rogan podcast,
Okay.
and he's the longevity guy
Mhm.
from Harvard, and he was talking about how there are a couple. like a couple years away from creating a program that you can have inserted, and it'll give you kind of like your biomarkers on a daily basis, blood pressure, blood glucose, and it'll start tracking red blood cell, white blood cell, and it'll kind of give you indications of whether or not you're prone to maybe having a heart attack in a couple of, like he said, they're on the verge of like refining it so much that you can prevent heart attacks, you can prevent all this stuff, right? So if you,
It's called Inside Tracker, isn't it?
that's the, yeah, that's the platform that he's starting to
Right.
build it off of. That tracks a lot of different things, including your genome and stuff like that. But it's also one of those ideas, right? Like you get something like that and you interface it with like a Neuralink, then you have constant track of people's health markers on a day-to-day basis, right? And it's like, you know, if you can incentivize them, be like, hey, you know, you lived a healthy, you took off years off your biological clock, right? You get a deduction in your health insurance. And if you are healthy enough throughout the year, then you'll get free health insurance until those health markers start to deteriorate. And it's like an incentivized program to be healthy, right? And
They're starting to put those in place up here.
it would be great if they had it. Now there's going to be a lot of wackos that are like, they're going to try to take control of us. And like, they already have control of you. Everyone has a
They
cell
have
phone.
everything.
Yeah, they have, you have your cell phone on you. You can't get rid of that. They already have you under control. And I just think being able to do that, I don't know if that would fix anything, but it would stop hindering people who are healthy from having to like make up for the fact that people can't get their shit together, which, you know, I mean, I guess if obesity is now termed a disease, then they have a way of diagnosing it beyond their own capabilities of handling it, which
I
I
always
don't
found
think
that
is.
I always found that interesting because that like to be just obesity being labeled as a disability happened during the time when I was in grad school. Like that, like legislation was filed while I was in grad school. And so it was a big topic of discussion because it in itself isn't necessarily an illness, but it is a precursor to almost every illness.
Right, but
So
it's mostly self-imposed. Very few people
I
have,
agreed. Yeah, totally.
yeah, very few people have that obesity gene where no matter what they do, they're gonna gain weight. Like that's very, very rare. So it's all self-imposed. I think self-imposed medical illnesses should be something that should have some type of negative consequences to it, but it doesn't.
So would you qualify like drug and alcohol addiction within that?
Yeah, I don't see why not. But that is, well, no, because that's addiction is a little bit different in my mind, because it's addiction is something that you can't really control, that starts to deteriorate your quality of life and people's around you's quality of life in a way. And
Wouldn't food addiction and obesity
I
like I'm
don't,
just playing devil's advocate
I know
here.
you are, but I don't think food addiction is a real thing as compared to those other type of addictions, right? Like if you look at the research on dopamine within the human body, if you do cocaine, you're getting a dopamine spike of like, I don't know, like 100,000, something crazy, right?
Yeah, you are.
But if you eat junk food, you'll get a dopamine spike of, far less magnitude. So you're
Right.
not chasing that as much, but you're also inundated with a lot more. But I mean, if you incentivize people that are addicted to things, I don't necessarily think that would stop the addiction so much. I'm not really sure. This is far beyond my scope of like actual
Oh, of
good
course. It's just
knowledge.
just speculating. Up here we have a few programs, like different insurance companies offer different programs. The one I used to work for offered a program called Vitality that worked off of like your Fitbit or your iWatch. So it would track your activity level, heart rate metrics. Anytime you went in for a physical, you could input manually your different markers and stuff like that, and it would give you discounts off of your insurance rates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Similar idea to like people having those chips inserted into their cars to save on car insurance if they drive like old ladies.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know there was a place like in Eastern Europe where you had to do X amount of air squats and that would get you a free ride on the subway.
Would you do them? Would you have to hit depth?
Are you questioning my ability to hit depth, or are you asking me?
No.
Oh,
Are you taking it as that? Are you getting defensive?
I felt very, yeah, I felt like it was a very big personal attack. Um, would I do them? Yeah, of course. Why not, right? I'm cheap, man. I do anything for free, just
I
about.
don't I don't think I could air squat right now. I did a drop set on leg extensions and I can barely walk.
Oh, well, that's adorable.
You know,
I
I'm
did.
learning.
We went to Fortitude. We went to a Fortitude camp that Dr. Scott Stevenson put on down in Bradenton.
Okay.
And it was great, man. We went over like a couple hours of actual presentation and talking about like volume landmarks and what drives volume and what is considered volume. And then we went to some practical stuff, and he asked anybody have any weak body parts. I'm like, yeah, my VMO sucks, because as a power lifter, most power lifters VMOs are garbage, because
Awful.
that's just, yeah, that's not necessarily the most efficient way, unless you're Asian, to squat and lift a bunch of weight, right? We're mostly adductors, hip dominant squatters. So he was showing me some leg extension exercises to do. And man, I did one set with him, and my VMO was so pumped. It didn't go away for like at least 4 hours. And it was so ridiculous, but he was doing it, and like I could just see it starting to work. And he would just make like minor details, right? Like start to rotate your feet out more, and then drive with this, and it was just like such basic stuff. But man, it made a world of difference just being able to play around with that. So, and the leg extensions, man, they're like up there. Like you can push those to
Yeah.
a threshold that you don't really know what kind of damage you've done until you left the machine.
For me, there's two things that resonate with me there. Number one is like the execution of the exercise. Like you're still extending your leg, but that slight external rotation of the foot, like the slight, intent of, for me, it's driving my heel up with my toe. That really allows me to hit my VMO. But for me, it's like that leg extension is the most painful machine that I will get on in a workout by
Yeah.
far.
Yeah. And they're extremely valuable, right? And this brings us to one of the topics we want to touch upon, is like some of the mistakes we've made in the past with programming, right? And one that we can fall into a lot of times is, right, functionality within the training paradigm. And that could be also a byproduct of where you're training at too. I had a garage gym. I owned a gym in Florida, and we trained out of that. And we're not going to have a $5,000 leg extension piece of equipment in there, because it's just hard to keep up in the Florida humidity and things of that nature. But even if we did, it would be something that I devalued, because coming from the way I was brought up with training and stuff was like Elite FTS, West
Mm-hmm.
Side, and reading a bunch of those things. And the way the information was disseminated was they mostly stuck to really teaching the conjugate principles, and not so much thinking about like actual accessories and exercises that can build carryover, that were isolatory in nature, right? They always said, 20% main exercise, 80% accessories. But in my mind, and even through the seminars that I've done with them, those accessories are still mostly compound movements. It's like, how much bang for your buck can you get, right? And this happens a lot in the strength and conditioning field as well. Whenever I was really getting into that type of stuff, right? The idea of an isolation exercise is taboo, and it kind of still is to a certain degree. But then you look at some of the rehab literature, and you look at some of the exercises that a lot of these top guys are doing, they're starting to fade more into the isolatory stuff to produce the results, right? Like if you want to build some resiliency within the tendons and get that person healthy after some type of reconstructive surgery or some type of injury, right? Isolation leg extensions with eccentrics and isometric holds are a great way to build that up. And you'll have those other people where it's like, well, we'll just do like the Joel Seedmans of the world, where they're like, oh, we're going to be on a kind of like one of those mushy pads, and we're going to do our stability stuff there because it's more functional, because the ground isn't level everywhere you go. And I think that's something that I fell into a good bit, was when you're working with athletes and you're working with individuals in specialized populations, you're trying to also sell them. And that's another issue that I've had with programming that I've gotten away from over the years is, once you build your credibility, there's no real need to sell people on it anymore. But
Mhm.
when you're starting off, right, you're trying to create the most bang for your buck. So you're trying to do cool exercises that make people think like, oh, wow. And then you can like post about it on YouTube, like DeFranco would do with his box jumps and stuff. Right. And then you would do, your heavy stuff. And then at the end, you'd be like, oh, okay, now it's time for accessories. Just pick whatever, right? Just get a pump.
Yep.
Right. And
Yep.
that was the way. Those were such an afterthought. And now looking back on it, it's like, if I don't do my accessories now, I'm probably going to be limping the next day. And accessories are far more valuable as an older lifter, to be able to maintain um, any type of recovery and any type of movement paradigm, any type of flexibility, right? Your accessories are extremely important in that. And just because it's important for us as older lifters now doesn't mean it's not important for younger lifters, right? It's the idea of like, just because you can get away with it doesn't mean you should get away with it, right? If you can program for an older lifter and keep them healthy and get them strong, those dynamics should be able to correlate down to a younger lifter as well, right?
Mhm.
So that was kind of one of the things that I messed up with, is really focusing on trying to get output driven results for athletes and for myself, rather than focusing on trying to stay as healthy as possible to drive results. So exercise selection in that capacity was a big mistake that I made in the very beginning.
Yeah, I was like, so the way we got on this was I did a case study for Coach's Corner where I was looking at old programs to look at how I implemented jump training into the programs. And I was reading them and I was like, man, this is so fucking bad. And not in the sense that like they wouldn't work, because obviously they worked and they had, teams had great results with them. But knowing what I know now, I would have completely changed the way that I did them. Exercise selection for me didn't jump out. Number one jumped out was like the sheer volume of work that I would program for
Mm,
people
yeah.
was just ridiculous. Like the amount of, quote unquote junk volume that people were doing. Yeah, they were doing a lot of work and their work capacity definitely came up, but how much of that was actually meaningful, I doubt very much.
And even on top of that, if it wasn't meaningful, I hear Dave talk about this all the time, where it's like you only have X amount of squats in your hips, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And when his hips started to go, he was doing all this mobility stuff and he was doing all this stuff to try to make things better. And his doctor told him that the mobility stuff actually deteriorated his hip more and more, that he would have been better off not doing any of the mobility stuff. And he probably would have had an extra 2 to 3 years on his lifting career. Right. So it's the idea of like that volume, just because you can handle it doesn't mean you're not going to pay for it 10 years down the road. Right. And especially with what we know now, that volume isn't created equal. It's like the idea of calories or calories. It's like, well,
Yep.
no, right? Volume is not volume when it's equated for intensity and actual intent, right?
Yeah. So that and that's something that I'm finding more and more. Like my warm-ups now are shorter than ever. Um, my training sessions are much more efficient. Uh, in the programs that I'm writing for my athletes have a lot more of one set of X, two sets of X. Um, whereas before it was like 5 by 10.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, how many of those 5 sets are going to be meaningful to failure, or whatever? It's not really not much. The other thing that jumped out was like my warm-ups that I would have people do, like the mobility warm-ups that I would have people do were so extensive. Like, all right, you're going to do 5 minutes of cardio of choice, then you're going to do 3 sets of bird dogs, 3 sets of McGill crunch, 3 sets of rolling plank, then you're going to go into your Spider-Man stretch and blah, 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 blah. And it's like 30 minutes later, you might touch your barbell.
Yeah.
And that was the norm. And then, and before that, even before that, it was, all right, you're going to foam roll everything for 2 minutes each spot. And so after you're done massaging your whole body and treating it like a piece of meat, then you're going to go do your core stiffening. Then you're going to do your mobility. It's like, man, how much time did I waste for people?
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that for you as well is like you've worked in the strength and conditioning field where time is of the essence. Like you didn't have that type of time. You had to manage your time with your athletes
We would
very,
make them come in before sessions. So we'd make them come in beforehand or stay
and
afterwards,
you
do
had
that
them
sort of
doing
thing.
that same shit.
Or I had them doing them at home.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's something that's interesting, right? It's like the idea of, you know, justify mobility, flexibility type of training. When is it needed? When is it necessary? How much is enough?
Mhm.
Um, that's something that one, they don't have a lot of really quantifiable research on it because they usually do single modalities to quantify things instead of mixed modalities. You know,
Right.
as you start to add in more modalities, it gets harder and harder to find the variable to extract from of which one was actually valuable. But I think being able to refine that process is something that is extremely valuable because then you put more of a ionus on movement quality and exercise selection quality to drive those flexibility and mobility paradigms that you're looking for.
Absolutely. And one thing to remember too is like I came up in that era where it was, we need to mobilize the shit out of everything. I came up in the area where it's like, we're going to foam roll. Like, if ever people started following Eric Cressy when he first got famous,
Mm-hmm.
dude, everything was lacrosse ball this, foam roller that. Pal off presses until you puke out of your asshole. Like, all this stuff was, I basically came up with the times and I can kind of look into the previous programs like, all right, this is when I was following DeFranco stuff. This is when I was really into
Yeah.
Eric's stuff. This is when I was really into Tristan Thibodeau stuff. And you learn and apply as you go. And there was even a point where I programmed strictly block periodization for everybody.
Mm.
It was like, you learn, and you're a product of your environment. You're a product of those who influence you, which is why I think it's important, and I've mentioned it a number of times in the podcast, to learn from as many places as possible, right?
Yeah,
Because then you
incredible
start to
places at
make,
that.
yeah, you start to make your own decisions and see what works, what doesn't, what fits your philosophies, what doesn't. um, I look at the other piece that I would look at is the amount of intensity that I used to program, like in terms of absolute intensity. I went through periods where I would program very little absolute intensity, where athletes would literally never lift heavy, maybe like 2 heavy sessions before a meet, and they did really well. And then I had, some athletes that would train really heavy all the way up to a meet, and they would do really well. And then looking back and saying, like, okay, well, if they're both doing really well, there has to be some combination of the two to find a happy medium that fits what the research tells us is more appropriate, because we know that if we want to be strong, we have to train heavy. But at what frequency do we need to train it? Could those people who did well training light have done better? Or could those people who got really good results training heavy could have gotten them there a little more healthy and then consequentially done better? Right? So these are always the questions that come into my mind. And I feel like, having looked back on those programs and where I am now with regards to the way I'm training athletes and collecting data and iterating on my process more often, it's definitely been, you find out. I have an athlete who, anytime I lift him over 80% for 3 weeks in a row, he crashes.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have him lift up to 80% and we do some sort of, you know, maybe moderate volume, like get him up to like an 80% for a top set of 6 or 7, which is a ridiculous amount of reps at 80%. If I test him, he always PRs.
Hmm.
So why would I lift him heavy going into a meet if I know I can get him PRs lifting only to 80%?
Right. Yeah. No need to,
It's,
right?
I wouldn't know that unless I collected the data. And if I had this like rigid template, then I wouldn't be able to have collected that data.
So are you saying in the past that thing that you used to do was either not collect data very well or have rigid
But
templates?
just be more rigid in my approach. Like, this is
Yeah.
what we're gonna do.
I think that's the biggest thing for most coaches starting off is you become very dogmatic in the thing that you buy into the most, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, like for me, it was Conjugate and DeFranco's West Side for Skinny Bastards. And one, it was fun, it was new, and it does get you strong, right?
Mhm.
Like I think conjugate training is a great approach to do for athletes and for strongman competitors, right?
Yep.
In its truest sense, right? But you become very uncreative when you start to just focus in on the things that fit your narrative. And
Mhm.
that's something that I look back on, and thankfully I've always thought of myself as being an idiot, so I never knew with certainty what I was doing was like actually good, so it made me question a lot of what I do. And I still carry that curiosity, not so much that I'm an idiot anymore, but it's more of like a curiosity of like, I wonder why this works for this person. What am I doing wrong, right? So I'm a lot more curious as an athlete as I got older, and as a coach, whereas before it was like conjugate and that was it. And I read everything I could about conjugate and Russian philosophers, and you still hear that to this day of some coaches. Their only frame of reference is like, well, the Russian philosopher said this, and it's
Right.
like, okay, sure, got you.
It's funny. It's funny you say that because I think we all go through that phase. And I can point back to it, like the moment I got slapped in the face with it. There was two instances where I was, you're super rigid and you think you know everything. And then something happens and you're like, yo, I'm really fucking dumb. And I find as I've gotten older, and even as I've gotten into educating others about training, my level of curiosity and my level of certainty in my knowledge has gone down
Yeah.
because I'm so much more open to it. But like I remember we were all sitting in a group. I feel like I've told this story on the podcast before. And Ron
You're old, you're
McKeefer,
going to repeat a lot of stories
yeah,
if
I
you're
know.
older, so.
Ron McKeefer, who's the head strength coach at South Florida, was talking about how he was using the Smith machine squat for one of his athletes. And I just blurted out, like, unconsciously, like, that's dumb. This guy just won strength coach of the year in the NCAA.
Oh, he's a
That's
legend.
dumb. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation about it after the fact, but he kind of was like, hey, everything's a tool.
Right.
And that worked for that athlete. So he kept going with it. And then
Yeah.
there was another instance where, I came into a training session just full of piss and vinegar with one of my teams, and they just weren't having it. They just didn't give a fuck. And it was the most well thought out program I had thought I ever wrote, and everything was great, and they just shit the bed on it. And Todd Hammer came up to me afterwards. He's like, that was a pretty rough session for you, eh? I'm like, yeah, man. Like, what's going on? He's like, they know you don't care. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, they can tell that you're coaching the program and you're not coaching them. And I was like, okay. So
Yeah.
people forget that, like, we could talk science all day, but for me, that was the instance of like, everybody's different and everybody needs something different. And just because it says it in the book doesn't mean it's going to work.
Right. Yeah. Individuality is such an important thing. And the thing you're describing too is like the Dunning-Kruger effect that I
Yeah.
see a lot within like college situations and things like that. And thankfully I never fell into that, like thinking that I knew everything approach. I don't know why, but for some reason, once you get on Elite FTS and you realize there's thousands of articles and you're never going to be able to finish reading them all, you fully understand like there's so much more to learn. But I just always thought, where you where you go is the product of your environment as well, right? And I've for some reason gravitated towards conjugate training and then didn't really get outside that box of thinking until I started training with Dan Green and learning from Dan and stuff. And one of the big mistakes I made with conjugate is the idea of you're doing these specialty exercises to get strong in a bunch of different like areas of focus,
Mhm.
that the completion of the rep was more important than the quality of the rep when it came to the max effort stuff, because you're just trying to get strong in disadvantageous positions. So that was something that I just always thought about, was like, I'm just here to lift the weight. I'm not here to be perfect. It's not going to be pretty. And then I got to training with Dan and Chris Duffin and those guys. And it was like, quality of reps is something that's extremely valuable and extremely important. And, thankfully I never got injured, could be due to all the variation and stuff, but I didn't really focus on quality of movement until, you know, 7 years into my lifting career for myself as an athlete. And then as soon as I did that, my total went from, 1,600 to 2,000 in 3 or 4 years.
It
And that
sounds like you
was,
just discovered drugs.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. Like once I learned how like to root and brace and how important those things were from Duffin, my total shot up. And then just learning about not even so much like technique from Dan, but just understanding that the competition movements are something that you have to train on a continuum to get better at them. There is some skill acquisition to it, whereas like you follow the conjugate system in Westside, it's like you don't really need to squat until you go to the meet. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes, like you're just getting really strong. And then like it's just squat. It's not that big of a deal. And it's like, it makes a huge difference. Right. And it's just one of those things where, you know, I think starting out, a lot of people fall into two camps: the camp of variation to drive adaptation, or the camp of specificity to drive adaptation. And we've seen that get blown out of proportion on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Specificity within athletes, having them fucking throw punches with like a weight stack behind them, right? And they're throwing their punches and it's like, that's, when you understand body mechanics and biomechanics of punching and stuff like that, and force velocity and those things that are important to make someone, have a snap to their punches, you're like, that's the stupidest thing ever. Or like, the fucking football jammer machines where it's like get in a 3-point stance and then come up and do the jammer. And it's like, man, you fall into that specificity realm of things and understand that there's value in both. And you have to find that sweet spot for you to continue to make progress through specificity, and then use variations to drown out the monotony and to just give people things to look forward to when they come into the gym. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I learned a lot when I got to training with Dan, and I meshed both the conjugate and his style of periodization together. And that was a big mistake I made as a younger coach. And I got away with it because I did strongman and I trained athletes. So it wasn't as important to have barbell back squats in your program, right?
Oh, for sure. I still train a few athletes. I have a CFL guy right now. He's like, when are we going to back squat? I'm like, never.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
I'm like, you have a history of disc injury. Why would I back squat you? He's like, oh, like we always back squatted when I was at UConn. I'm like, yeah, you're also 30 now.
Right.
You're 30 and you played, 8 years in the league.
Yeah.
We're not back squatting you, bro. He's like, okay, cool.
Yeah. And if you did, it would be like maybe the quarter squats, right? Just to get that force output, that power production, or more like a Cal Dietz SSB split squat where you're doing like a Hatfield style or belt squat. Like there's so many ways to get it done, right? And exactly. I think that's important too. But those were the two biggest ones for me, is the idea of variation and specificity, kind of blending them together, and then the idea of exercise selection through accessories being a huge driving force of improvement and longevity in sport. When I look back at older programs, those are the things that make me cringe the most.
For me, it was the volume and the warm-ups.
Yeah. Which is volume, right? Volume.
Everything volume.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, dude, I remember one meet prep, actually a bunch of meet preps. My meet prep training cycle, I would squat twice a week. It was an adaptation of the Russian peaking program. So it's 80% on both days for bench and squat, and then one deadlift a week. You go on one day, you go 80% for 6 sets of 2. On the second day is 80% for 6 sets of 3, then 4, then 5, and then 6. on subsequent weeks, but that first day stays at 6 doubles.
Mm.
Then you go into 85% for 5 twos, then 90 for 4 twos, 95 for 3 twos, and then you max out for a double. And I did that without fail, 3 meet preps in a row, and added like 60 to 100 pounds to my squat every set, every
Yeah.
block. And it worked. So I programmed that for all my athletes. I'm like, this is fucking great. Everyone needs to do this. And then I started realizing like, this is way overkill.
Right.
And then I started chipping away at it. And I still use it to some extent with some athletes, but I just realized just because it works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody.
Right. And I mean, that's the thing, right? Adopting training modalities that come from Olympic coaches and coaches that just have such a large pool to choose from, that, it's survival of the fittest with a lot of these programs that people adopt for everyone. It's like, well, you can't do that, right? You're only looking at the successes. You're not looking at the 90% attrition rate that these programs produce, right? It's like higher than the Navy SEALs, but it's like, no, this is what the Russians did, so we're all going to do it, right?
This is gonna work.
All right, so some of the questions we got some good ones from everyone. One that I thought was pretty good and always a timely thing is, I just did a powerlifting meet yesterday. Now what? I'm confused on how to train post meet. So this can go in many directions in terms of thinking about what is the best type of information to give to this person, right? And there's a lot of variables that go into it. Are you a geared lifter that is getting off gear, right? That's one consideration. Are you fat and need to go down a weight class? That's another consideration. Are you feeling good? Or are you banged up after that meet prep? That's another consideration. So there's a lot of it depends. In a lot of cases, if you're jumping off cycle and you're a geared lifter, talking about PEDs, the first thing that you should do, the most important thing you should do, is you should get your calories up, regardless of your body composition. You should not jump off PEDs and then go into a deficit, because you're going to feel like shit, right? But that's what happens a lot. A lot of people tell you to go into a deficit after a meet because that's a good time to cut weight. I say that, right? But there's a lot of variables that go into that. So if you are someone who is going to be cruising or is going to be doing a post-cycle therapy, right? Understanding the post-cycle therapy and how to implement that correctly, but also understanding that calories are going to drive that anabolic response more than anything when you're off of PED. So getting those calories up as high as humanly possible is going to be very, very important. And then if you are someone who needs to lose weight, right, finding out where your calories are and then going into more of a higher volume block of training so that you're eliciting enough of a stimulus to keep the muscle on that you have. It wouldn't be a good idea to go into a block of, very low volume, very high intensity, much like a Pekin block would look like, right? So you want to make sure that volume's high and you're driving some type of adaptation. And then from a general perspective, right, you want to, after meet, assess how the meet prep went. You want to assess whether or not you have any type of irregularities within imbalances or injuries or anything like that. And then if you have those things, then you start to put your program together to fix those compensation patterns, to fix that bilateral deficiency. And then from there, you start putting in the compound movement. So I always think I build my accessories based on injuries and injury prevention and bilateral deficits and things of that nature. And then once I understand, like, this is the volume they're going to need from these accessories, then I put their main work into use and modulate the volume of their main work based on the volume of their accessories. But for me, post meet, accessories are the most important thing to make sure that you're healthy, to make sure that everything feels good, but you're not going to necessarily deviate from the main lifts as well. So that's covered a few different kind of standpoints cover, however you want to, Paul.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with you on all fronts. And the number one thing that I would say is get back to training as soon as your body allows you to do that. For some of my lifters, I just had a lifter compete this past weekend. He's over 40. So this week, what I actually had him do is I made him repeat his meet week training in reverse. So he trained twice during the meet week, where one day was around like 50 to 60%, and the other day, and the day earlier in the week was around 60 to 70%. So I just had him repeat it. So he got back and did an SBD day at around 50 to 60% on Tuesday, Wednesday. And then on Friday, Saturday, he did a 60 to 70% day. And then we'll start back to training right after that on the Monday. Some lifters, if they're really banged up, mentally they need a break. Taking a week off after a meet is not going to kill you. But the goal is that as soon as mentally you're back into it, get back to training. Start off slow, because your stamina will be quite bad. If you detrain somewhat working on singles, you don't want to jump back into sets to failure, multiple sets to failure right off the bat. I would take a couple of weeks, kind of like an acclimation week. But other than that, my recommendation is to get right back into training as soon as possible. From a nutritional standpoint, as you said, if you are an enhanced lifter and you are going to become a unenhanced lifter, drive your calories up, make sure that you're monitoring your nutrition very closely. Yes, you will probably get a little bit fatter, but that's the nature of the beast. You have to do that. If you
chose your sport wisely,
yeah, it's true.
Right?
If your goal is after the meet, you want to drop some weight and you are an enhanced lifter, I would, as much as it pains me to say this, I would advise you maybe don't drop your enhancement much, if at all. Maybe I would take out the ancillary drugs. Actually, I would definitely take out the ancillary drugs or any orals that you were taking. But
not to cut you off here, but
no, go
it's
ahead.
like when you give that advice to a lifter, yes, I agree that if that's the scenario that you're in, that's what you should do. But that shouldn't be the scenario that you're in. That's such a nearsighted goal of like, it's not a long-term goal, right? It's so when you have those lifters that are so, short-term goal oriented that they can't actually plan out what would be the most successful thing for them to do. As a coach, that's your job to really push longevity and a long-term perspective for that lifter. It's like, hey man, look, I know you feel like you're fat. I know you look like mushed up bubble gum in your singlet. Not a problem. Let's keep those calories up and let's get as much muscle on as we can. And then once your blood work comes back and you feel good in the gym and everything feels normal again, then we can look at pushing the PEDs back in and doing a cut from there. But it's like, you chose to be fat for X amount of years. You can continue to be fat for 6 to 12 weeks until we get you healthy and get you moving in the right direction. Right.
I completely agree. And hence why I said, and it pains me to say this.
Right. Exactly.
Because I'm definitely on the same page as you. But in terms of nutrition for me, I actually like to use that period, not necessarily to drop weight.
You're detoxing them, aren't you? Apple cider vinegar,
teas,
lemon juice.
I actually have them drink their own urine.
Ooh. I like that.
I will actually use that as a period to increase insulin sensitivity. So usually independent of body composition changes, if an athlete is going to be prepping for a meet, their calories have likely been high for quite a while. So dropping them down just a little bit and implementing a little bit more NEAT, get their insulin sensitivity up. Again, have them have some blood work done. The goal after a meet, if you're lifting at a high level, and if you're enhanced, the chances of you feeling really great after a meet, pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the goal is after a meet is to get back to feeling like yourself, get your blood work in order, get your health in order, and and have a period of reevaluation. That doesn't mean at all that your training needs to stop or slow down. It just means that during that period, you have different priorities, which is why I loved what you said about prioritizing the accessory movements over the main lift. You still have the main lift in there, but the accessory lifts are prioritized. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is like, oh, after meet, I'm not going to touch a barbell for 6 weeks. I'm like, cool, congrats on wasting 6 weeks of adaptation you possibly could have had.
Right. Yeah. That's the whole idea that you have to have an entire GPP phase dedicated to no barbell movement is, as much as I love Dave Tate and respect him, that's something that he preaches a lot. And maybe that was valuable for the West Side guys, but I have not seen that be valuable for any lifter that I've ever worked with.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, because I used to think that was a necessity as well. It's like, oh, let's give their spine some time to whatever, and it's like,
like, bone remodeling takes longer than muscles protein synthesis, blah, blah, blah. But, the other thing too, is like you take 6 weeks off of anything, you're going to detrain it.
Right.
So you might be healing it. Why not just reduce your frequency?
Yeah, exactly.
You have the same effect. And then the whole idea of, taking 6 weeks off and just focusing on assistance work. It's like, how's that fun?
Right.
Like, just in the plain sense of like, is that going to be fun for you? And if it's not, the whole fucking reason we do this is because it's fun.
Right. And it's not, when you say it out loud, it's just not productive. It's just not.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, to improve insulin sensitivity, I don't like that you promote NEAT so much as like, this is the cardio people should be doing.
Really? I love it.
Oh my God. It drives me crazy. It's like just because you're a strength athlete, they're so afraid to have heavy breathing put into their program. It's like, do some fucking HIIT intervals. Get out of breath, for Christ's sakes.
If I thought that my athletes would do it, I would program it.
Well, fire all your athletes. They suck.
That's great. I'll just fucking live on the street. My dogs will be homeless.
But that's the best way to do it. Like, oh, I'm going for a walk today. Let me send a picture to Paul. It's like, you're a piece of crap for promoting that. Just so you know. One, it's not neat. It's not actually really neat.
First, it's NEPA. Okay, yeah, I get it.
It's called steps. It's not neat.
It's called NEPA, non-exercise physical activity.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
It's exercise. Walking is exercise. How is it non-exercise? It's exercise.
I'm walking to the store.
Oh, get out of here. NEAT is all about fidgeting. And that's the premise of NEAT, right? It's not this extra walking stuff. I'm getting so fit, they got my 10,000 steps. What do you mean? Your heart rate's like, it drives me crazy, man. Like, go breathe heavy. Go do something.
Listen, it works.
It does not.
And this is coming from something like, I do HIIT intervals, so I get it. I know that. I actually really enjoy doing them.
They're great. They suck getting used to them, but once you start doing them, you feel great.
Like I did on Friday, I did a countdown of starting at 20 and dropping by 2 calories at a time.
I saw that. Yeah.
It was fucking brutal.
It looked brutal.
Yeah, like I love breathing heavy, but I know a lot of my clients fucking hate it and they just won't adhere to it. So I end up coming up with these elaborate circuits for them to do, and they never get done. So I just fucking stopped doing it. If clients ask me for it, 100% I'll program for it. Other than that, I just tell them to get their steps. And for the most part, steps and an appropriately programmed strength training intervention is enough to maintain their fitness enough to recover from training.
It's enough, but it's, yeah. What attributed to the best powerlifting meet you've ever had, Paul O'Neid? We'll let you go first since you've never had a better powerlifting meet than me.
My Wilks is higher than yours.
Who cares? That's
true.
The stupidest thing.
What attributed?
You can take all the formulations you want, you nerd. I still have a 2,000-pound total, and you don't.
That's true. What attributed to my best powerlifting meet? I quit my job.
That's okay.
I quit my job. I was when I was training for my best powerlifting meet, I didn't have a job.
When you guys go to quit your job and your wife leaves you and your kids are on the street at a sweatshop because that's the advice Paul gave you.
Where are they gonna find a sweatshop in the US?
Trust me, they're around. Okay,
Okay.
I can give a
What
couple
I'm getting at,
addresses.
is my total stress was very low. I went from working as a strength coach, 70 plus hours a week, early, very poor sleep quality, and then commuting on the weekends, back and forth a few hours each way to come back home to see the girlfriend at the time. I went from doing that to uh, you know, working maybe 3 hours a day, um, and keeping my stress was super low. I was sleeping a ton, eating a ton. Yeah, my
Okay,
train in terms of training, I trained like a retard, if I can say the retard word.
say whatever you want, man. There's only two people that listen to this show, anyways.
That's true. Yeah, I trained like an idiot. I beat myself into the ground, but
Yeah,
I had a crazy total.
yeah. So the most impractical advice: quit your job.
Yep, quit your job.
I don't know if I would agree with that, but I have told a couple clients this week that they should quit their job. It's like I have so many clients that are miserable, and it all points back to their job being so stressful they hate it. I'm like, just find something new. Start doing
I couldn't
interviews.
imagine doing something I hated 40 hours a week.
No. And not only if I hated it, but I knew that it devalued my life and brought the quality
Yeah,
of my life down.
100%.
And that would be the one thing that I don't know. But beyond quitting your job and like having a stress-free life, because obviously the less stress you have, typically the better the prep's going to go. For me, there was two things that I've done for the best meets. One, in training, I never missed a lift when I had my 2,000 pound totals. So that means that all the weights that I picked going into the meet were the appropriate weight to use for that day that allowed me to recover, to allow me to perform at the highest level on the platform. And then the other thing was that when I had to do any type of weight cut, I didn't reduce carbs drastically. I listened to my body's feedback on a day to day basis. And if my legs felt heavy, I introduced higher amounts of carbohydrates and electrolytes in for that day and still did water manipulation and weight cuts the day before. So I didn't allow my body to get too run down when I was cutting weight. I made sure that if my legs didn't feel heavy, then I was going to have a good day. Once they started feeling heavy, then I knew that I was dropping too many electrolytes, too many carbohydrates, and I wasn't going to be able to replenish that in a day. So that was something that my body, particularly for me, that was my feedback mechanism of like, if my legs felt heavy walking or going up the stairs, then I knew I was depleting myself beyond a point that I wouldn't recover from for the meet. So yeah, don't miss in training and make sure that you have an appropriate cut and refeed protocol that's not too, I would say, over the top extravagant. Because anytime you do that, you're playing with fire, and you're gonna get burned. You're trying to be 100% when all you need to be is like 90, 95%. So those would be the two biggest things that I would attribute to having the best powerlifting meet ever. I mean, obviously there's a lot of other things that go into it, good training partners, this, that, but those two things always equated to me for having, those are the two best meets I've ever had.
Yeah. The only other, so like the one where I had quit my job was the one, my big total at 220. And when I squatted 8 for the first time. And then my next big meet was after my knee surgery. Um, for that one, it was literally the opposite of the prep I did. The volume was so low. Um, I didn't push anything beyond. I remember I took my heaviest squat like 5 weeks out, and it was just very, very, very slow, very tapered. I'm trying to think. I also didn't cut for that meet.
Yeah, I mean
So it's
that's great advice
different
too,
kind of
right?
stress. Yeah.
Reduce stress by mitigating the variables going into the meet. Don't try anything new. Don't cut a bunch of weight. Don't cut it all if you can help it, right? Those are
Yeah.
the less stress. I mean, one thing that Dan Bell gets shit for sometimes is like he drinks alcohol during his meets. And when you talk to him, he'll tell you that the best way to calm his nerves is to have a little bit of alcohol. And that's why he's able to have fun and perform well on meet days. And, there's something to that, bringing down that stress and being able to have a good time. If you have a high anxiety, high arousal curve, and meet day gets the best of you, it might not be a bad idea to do something to calm your inhibitions a little bit and allow you to relax and have a good time.
I do the literal opposite.
Do you? Well, you're a calm guy to begin with, though.
Yeah, that's true. I think the last meet I did.
What do you do? Coke and what
ephedrine.
else? Oh, okay, blow and ephedrine. That's a good combo.
Blow, ephedrine, and nicotine.
Nicotine, yeah. Ooh, I like it. Nicotine from smoke or?
Yeah, I'm outside hacking darts.
Well, I mean, if you're doing blow in the bathroom, I figured you're gonna be hacking darts.
No, I do it out of
true Russian.
No, I'll do it out of a chick's butthole. I'll like bring a chick with me and just do the coke out of her.
So like
butthole.
Lawrence Taylor style.
Yep, exactly. LT baby all day.
You're the LT of powerlifting.
Minus being good.
Yeah, minus being a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Man, I've heard so many stories about him through like documentaries and stuff. And I think to myself, right, it's like, how one, is he good because of it, or is he good in spite of it? Like, could he be, you know how like you always say that thing where it's like, yeah, the guy, they're at their best, but they do this stupid shit. And it's like, well, do they do stupid shit, or does that stupid shit make them who they are?
Oh, right? Yeah, exactly.
Like Herschel Walker did push-ups and sit-ups, never lifted weights. If he lifted weights, would he still be Herschel Walker? It's like, I don't know. If LT wasn't doing blow and hookers the day before a game, would he still be LT? Who knows, right?
The jury's, we will never know.
You're always so focused on like optimization and like what would be the best on paper. And like we talked about earlier, it's like, man, the best on paper is never going to be what the best in practice is for that individual, because you're never going to see a paper on a Lawrence Taylor or on a, any of those guys, right?
It'd be really hard to get IRB funding.
Oh yeah, one control group trains and gets a good night's sleep. The other control group goes out and bangs hookers and does
bangs hookers and does blow.
Oh, they show up at like 10 a.m. when the game's at 11.
Yeah, perfect.
I mean, I've heard stories of him. He would send like hookers to his opponent's hotels to keep him up all night.
I heard Jordan did that too.
Yeah, Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Did he?
That's what I heard, yeah.
Yeah. I also heard too that the reason Jordan went to baseball is because he had driven up such gambling debt that the NBA was like, look, dude, you just need to go away for a year or two, because what you're doing right now is like, you can't have this. It wasn't like an actual him retiring and going to play baseball. I heard his gambling debt was so outrageous that they told him enough's enough, man. We can't have you in the league and having this type of stuff going down.
I never heard that. We should start spreading rumors about random things that we've heard.
Yeah, but it's not like good rumors. Like what, powerlifting rumors?
No. Just like random rumors.
Oh, I like that. I mean, I'm pretty good at it. I've been doing it my whole life. You should hear the stuff I say about you behind your back.
I'm sure it's just terrific.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Did you know I have a penguin farm?
No, you don't.
I do.
Penguins, they're so adorable. Tell me more about it.
One's named Lucky, and he has a little bit of a goatee. And I read him bedtime stories.
So you have one penguin, and you
No, that's just a story about one of my penguins on my farm.
Okay, so he must be your favorite because you neglect all the other ones because you only read him a story.
Yeah, well, he tells the story to the other penguins.
You have no kids, right?
I have 2 dogs.
Let's keep it that way. If you're gonna start picking stories to just read and ostracize one kid, you're gonna be like there was uh, there, I'm listening to this neuroscience book by David Spiegel, and one of the stories they're talking about was, I think his name was like Cursipian or something like that. And the story was that he was a kid who grew up with in kind of like a dungeon, and he didn't have any human interaction, and he ended up becoming a savant and did all this other stuff, and it was an amazing story, and people believed it for like 100 years. And then a psychiatrist finally came around and was like, no, this is impossible, this would never happen, right? And the story in Plantation, Florida, there was this girl, and the neighbors saw her like peeking out the window one day, and they were like, man, I've never seen this girl leave the house or anything. So they called the cops, and the cops came, and the mom opened the door, and they found this little girl in a closet filled with like feces and roaches and stuff. And the mom never took care of her or did any of that. And it took her, they put her in like assisted living and all that stuff. And they said, if she's lucky, by the time she's in her 30s and 40s, she may not have to wear a diaper ever again. Maybe if she's
What?
lucky. Yeah, yeah.
That's so fucked, dude.
But yeah, that's essentially what you're doing to your penguins by reading one bedtime story to one of them.
All right.
It seems
so
like a
for
bit of a
anyone
stretch.
listening, I
It seems
don't
like a
have
bit
a
of a
penguin
stretch,
farm, and
but
this is a joke gone way astray.
well, don't do stupid jokes, because I will take it to depths you don't want to go to, friend.
I'm so troubled right now.
But mine was based on true stories, so it was interesting because it was talking about, the book was talking about how developmental stages of a child's life is so valuable, and
Mhm.
how, you got to do X, Y, and Z and all these things to create the best type of environment. And as resilient as we are as human beings, we have to have that interaction from the ages of 0 to 7. And if we
Mhm.
don't do that, those kids are fucked, right? And it goes back to the neglect of children, and the idea of like, you should probably have to pass a couple tests in order for you to figure out if you're going to be a parent or not, right? Because like maybe we could have avoided that situation. But it's an interesting book. I don't remember the name of the book off the top of my head, but it's all neuroscience, and how we evolve, and how we grow from infant to child or to adult. And then they're also talking about some of this technology that they're creating to help people improve their vision, improve their hearing. And then it's like, well, if we can do that, why not make it like super physiological, right? And he's talking about some of the experiments they're doing to make these things super physiological in people, to give them like X amount of hearing that can make them, perceive things, or giving people like infrared type vision that some of the animals have, because some animals have infrared, and it's like, well, why can't humans develop? It's really fascinating book.
Do you want to be a superhero? Is that what this is about?
That's, if I had the choice, yes. But I would definitely, they would bring me in and test me, and I'd fail every single test. They'd be like, you're not even superhero material.
Aren't you deaf?
I'm deaf in my left ear. Yes.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you always keep
anything
Emma?
else you want to point
You
out?
keep Emma on your right, or do you keep her deliberately on your left?
Depends on the day. depends on what kind of mood I'm in and what I want to deal with.
Perfect.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Anything else you want to leave off with, or anything? I think we covered all that stuff pretty well.
No, I just would implore everyone to follow your dreams.
Ooh, I like it. Quit your job, have the meaning of your life. Yeah. Well, I mean, everyone that's listening to this, your dream is a elite total. So whatever it takes, quit your job, leave your family behind,
leave humanity behind.
Move to Columbus, leave in your car, train with Louis Simmons.
Yep.
Pretty much set the blueprint of how to be a successful powerlifter. Congratulations.
You're welcome.
We should start a Patreon, and people can donate to us for that type of information.
Deal.
So if you guys like the episode, please go to iTunes and leave a review, 5-star rating. It is on Coach's Corner now through iTunes, SoundCloud, and another one that no one listens to. Stitcher, that's it. That's so irrelevant nowadays. Yeah, and check out subject0steps.com. Check out baconandbarbells.co, coachescorneru.com, and metrolife.com. Those are the companies that support us and support this show. Thank you guys for the questions. We really appreciate it. And we will catch you guys next time we do a Q&A. Have a great one.